Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Tet Zion in Masechet Nedarim, and I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. So we ended yesterday with the Gemara that led to the Mishnah. So now we're going to begin with that Mishnah. The Mishnah is at the bottom of Tet Vavam Bet, and the Mishnah. In order to fully understand this Mishnah, we should recall the last Mishnah that we learned on Tuesday on Yudalit Avet had a parallel structure. It talked about that if one makes a neder using the word konam, which is making something prohibited to benefit like a korban, so if you do that regarding sleeping, speaking, walking, or having marital relations, then violating it will cause one to violate lo yachel dvaro. One should not desecrate one's word. And we saw that Ravina interpreted this as indicating that it was not a biblical neder, it was only a rabbinic neder. And so as a result, you would not have violated you would not have violated a prohibition, a biblical prohibition, and that's why it doesn't say asur. But you would have violated a rabbinic prohibition that you shouldn't, desecrate one's word. But now we're going to see that here we're going to, when it comes to a shvuah, it will be biblical. And so let's take a look, and we'll see that inside. So the first part of our Mishnah says shvuah she'eno yashen. She'eni yashen, she'eni medaber, she'eni mahalech asur. Again, clear the focus of a shvuah, of an oath, is on the person doing the swearing that he is not going to sleep, he is not going to speak, he is not going to walk. In all of those cases, it's asur. It's not just the rabbinic prohibition of lo yachel dvaro, but rather a biblical prohibition. And so it is a valid oath, and these various behaviors are absolutely forbidden. So that was part one of the Mishnah, and that paralleled the structure of the last Mishnah, where again, when it came to konam, that sleeping is going to be prohibited to me, konam that speaking is going to be prohibited to me, konam that walking is going to be. If somebody were to say any of those things, well, then it would not actually be a shvuah. It would only be it would not be a shvuah, because it's not. He didn't use the language of shvuah. It would be an attempted neder. It wouldn't be a biblical neder, but it would be a neder that the rabbis say, listen, because it's going to be a valid shvuah, if you use the language shvuah instead of konam, we don't want you to think that this is just nothing. And so as a result, we're going to say that it's going to be a rabbinic prohibition. So that is that structure. And now we continue, and now we say korban lo ochel lecha. If I just say, now we go back to the language of neder, right? Because we say korban or konam are two versions of a language that say that what you're really trying to say is something is like a korban to me. But if you say korban, I shall not eat of yours, right? So then, or ha korban she'ochelach, or behold a korban that I eat of yours, or lo korban lo ochel, or not a korban that I not eat of yours. In all of those cases, mutar. In all cases, it is not an oath whatsoever, and it's totally permitted to say those things. Maybe it's not good advice to say them, but you're not violating. There's no oath there for you to violate. So let's take a look, and we'll parse those three. So let's take a look in the Mefarish, which is labeled as Rashi. It's the inside column of the explanation. So there'll be three that we'll take a look at. So korban lo ochel. If you say the words korban, I shall not eat of yours, it doesn't mean anything, because dahainu kamo imra, that's like saying a sheep lo ochel demutter, right? We saw earlier that if you reference a sheep, reference the korban animal, and I'm not going to eat of it, it's mutter, because you're not. What are you tying together? You're saying that not eating somebody's food is like a korban. Well, that means that the person's food is not like a korban, which means that it's totally permitted. So you haven't said anything effectively at all. Okay, what would have been, just as an aside, what would have been a valid statement is if I said korban ochelacha. If I say korban, then what I'm saying is that that if I reference a korban, what I eat of yours, so then that would constitute an oath that I would prohibit me, again, according to Rebbe Meir, as we have seen before. All right. Now, what about ha korban she'ochelacha? Nami mutter, that is also going to be permitted, according to, as again, looking in the Mefarish, which is identified as Rashi. Delo nadar ela b'chaye korban. You have to say the language of chaye korban in order to make a vow. And here you just said ha korban, behold a korban. You could say kid korban, or if you have to make a comparison, but just saying ha korban, that isn't going to do the trick. All right. And low korban lo ochelacha, again, now what would low korban lo? So it said not a korban, what I don't eat from you. The implication of that is miklal lav ata shomea hein. If we were able to derive from a negative statement a positive statement, so using powers of logic, if I say not a korban, what I don't eat from you, that implies yes, a korban, what I do eat from you. Well, that would be a valid vow. However, so right, mashma b'shvil isur lo ochelacha, that because of an isur, I'm not going to eat from you. So she'im ochelacha lahavi asur, right? So that would that would imply that if I do eat from you, it should be permitted. Like a korban, it would be like a korban. Umutar the time of the Rebbe Meir, and the reason that we say that this is permitted is because we follow Rebbe Meir. This is going according to Rebbe Meir. He does not use that principle of learning from a negative for the positive. To Rebbe Yehuda, because if you were to say that this Mishnah was actually according to Rebbe Yehuda, Bein Amar Korban She'ochelacha, Bein Amar Ha Korban She'ochelacha B'Tarvayu Matir. Rebbe Yehuda says that you need to have the conjunction like. And so without the conjunction, none of these statements could possibly be a problem. And so he would not differentiate between korban and ha korban. But in our Mishnah, we do differentiate, because if one were to say in this Mishnah, korban ochelacha, that would be a problem. So Rabbi, right? So Mata Rabbi Yehuda afilu amar korban she'ochelacha kedamrinam bik pirkan la'el. As we saw in the first parak, that's going to be a problem. Korban ha korban kid korban. Oh, he left. Okay, so he's not going to be able to join us. All right. So I'm sorry to hear that. Okay, so asur. So in all of those cases, that is asur. But why is it asur? Money Rebbe Meir. It's Rebbe Meir. He delo shani bein imra leki imra. That there's no difference between saying imra, the animal, is like, or like the animal. That in both cases, Rebbe Meir understands that that you don't need the word like. That the word like is implied. But Dil Rebbe Yehuda, korban she'ochelacha mutter. But for Rebbe Yehuda, just saying korban that I eat of yours is going to be permitted, even though Rebbe Meir says, well, what the guy really means is clearly that whatever he eats of the other person should be like a korban, so therefore it should be prohibited. Rebbe Yehuda says, no, you have to actually say it. What you say really matters. And that's the clear lesson of all of this, is that what you say really matters. So all right, so now let's go into the Gemara as we turn to Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. And so what we begin the Gemara by wondering who authored our Mishnah. So Mani Masnisin, who's our Mishnah? And of course, we already have the answer, because we saw in the Mefarish that it refers to Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir here, it's got to be Rebbe Meir. The Rabbi Yehuda, because if it was Rabbi Yehuda, lo shani karban, lo shani leha karban. Rabbi Meir, would not differentiate between karban and ha karban, but our Mishnah does differentiate between the two. It's only ha karban that you could say ha karban she'ocha lecha. If you were to say karban she'ocha lecha, Rabbi Meir would say that was problematic. But the problem is Ema Seifa. But now take a look at the end of our Mishnah. But that seems to be inconsistent with another statement of Rebbe Meir, because la karban lo ochel lecha mutter. Because in our Mishnah it says that la karban, I shall not eat of yours, is permitted. But Vahatanan, we have a Mishnah that we learned on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph that said la karban lo ochel lecha. Rebbe Meir oster. Rebbe Meir prohibited and said that was a valid vow, that exact same language. So how do we coincide? How do we resolve this apparent internal conflict in Rebbe Meir? So for Rebbe Abba, as we have seen previously, Rebbe Abba says, Nasa, and to emphasize the question, Rebbe Abba, Nasa Ka'omer, why is it as if it's prohibited? Because it's as if the person said, La Karban, it's like a karban, la karban yehei, it's like a karban that the thing should be, lefikach lo ochel lecha, and therefore I'm not going to eat of yours. So when you say la karban ani lo ochel lecha, that's saying that your stuff should be like a karban, and that's why I'm not going to eat it, meaning that it's a valid vow, and that's why Rebbe Meir says that it's a valid vow. So now, why doesn't he say that over here as well? So lo kasha hada amran la karban, hada amran le karban. That here, when we say la karban, meaning it's like you're saying not a karban, and so as a result, it's not a karban, and so that's the problem. It doesn't work, the language. But when you say likarban, then it's going to be a valid the lo havi karban ka'amar, right? So when you say lo karban, so then it's not a karban. But if you say lo karban, then it's going to be a valid vow. And so as a result, because what's the person trying to say, right? That what we want to get the person to say is that this food of the other person is like a karban. And so if the person says lo korban, then it does that the derivation that Rabbi Abba offers, the explanation that Rabbi Abba offers, doesn't work, because you're saying that about the food that it's not a korban. So as a result, it's only if you say li korban in a positive way to say that the other food is a korban, and then you put a comma and you say, as a result, I'm not going to eat of yours. And so that would be a valid vow. So, okay, so now we've explained how the two Mishnayot can all be according to Rebbe Meir's view. All right, so Shvua lo ochel lecha. So now we go on to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah again continues this parallel language. Instead of saying, remember, the end of the last Mishnah said karban lo ochel lecha, ha karban she'ochel lecha, and lo karban lo ochel lecha. Now we're going to focus on the word shvua. So shvua lo ochel lecha, ha shvua she'ochel lecha, la shvua lo ochel lecha, asur. In all three of these cases, it is considered prohibited. And let's take a look in the Ran on the Mishnah on the left side of the page. And the Ran will walk us through all three of these cases. So, shvua lo ochel lecha, hashvua she'ochel lecha, shvua lo ochel lecha, asur. All three of them are asur. Mishum de shvua lo ochel lecha, mashma b'shvua lo ochel lecha. Right? What is it when I say I'm making an oath that I not eat of yours? That's an oath. Then of course it's going to work. So v'hashvua she'ochel lecha. And what about when I say behold an oath that I'm going to eat of yours? Hachi mashma. The implication is deleka leperushe lishna dechai shvua ka'amar. That it's as if I'm saying, behold an oath ka'amar v'kedamrin chai korban, just as I were to say that by the life of a korban. So delo mishtoi in shehachi. Right? A person's not going to say that, and so as a result, the implication is that I'm not going to eat of your food. So and we'll deal with that more in the Gemara. Shvua lo ochel and then v'la shvua lo ochel nami afilu belamed, even belamed pesucha aser. Even when you have a lamed with a pasach with an a vowel sound, because and which implies that you're not making oath. That even though, right, the apal gaf de lamed tucha lo mashma, even though the word la with an a under it, the lamed with an a under it implies not. Masnis and Rebbe Meir, we can even still say that our Mishnah is Rebbe Meir, even though he says generally that we don't derive a negative, a positive statement from a negative statement, right? Because again, here he would say, not a shvua that I don't eat of you, meaning shvua that I do eat of you. So he's swearing that he's not going to eat from the person. So even so, in this case, it's going to be prohibited. Well, why? So the Ron explains, it seems in my eyes, in Mesechus Shvuas, it says in the Perek Shvuas Ha'edus on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, Rebbe Meir Meklal Lav Atashomei Ahain. When is it that Rebbe Meir doesn't agree with this concept of learning from the negative for the positive? Hani Mili b'Mamona. That's with a fiscal thing. So Inami b'Isura. But when it comes to Isura, De'ispe Mamona, and similarly, it would apply to prohibitions that have a monetary component. And that's what a neder is all about. A neder is about the object. It's prohibiting the object to me, not prohibiting, not saying that I'm not going to use the object. And so as a result, it's effectively a monetary thing, because I can get a different, if I were to swear not to use this mask, I could get a different mask and use that. But when it comes to a lesser, a kind of negative commandment, Islay, so then he would say we miklal lav atashomei the Nedarim isura to isbe mamona. But when it comes to Nedarim, that's a monetary thing. Ninhu mishum delo mishkachas bahu below chetza, because it doesn't apply without an object. Daha einan tchalin al daber she'ein bo mamish, because it only applies if there's substance to it. It doesn't apply to something that without substance. Aval shvuas einan ela surah greda. That's just a negative prohibition. Shehu chal begufo. That's on the person who makes the oath. The kaven di surah greda ninhu afilu Rabbi Meir moda de amrin behu miklal alav atashamehin. When it comes to that kind of commandment, so then we're going to say that even Rabbi Meir would agree that we can derive from the negative a positive. And so here he would derive from the fact of lo shvua lo ochelacha to shvua sha'ochelacha. And so as we just saw, ha shvua sha'ochelacha is an oath that says I'm not going to eat of yours. So now the Gemara asks, Miklal da ha shvua sha'ochelacha the lo achilna mashma. Now you're telling me, based on this second concept, that the shvua that says that I'm going to eat of you is an oath. You know, that sounds like an oath to eat, but in our Mishnah we understood it as an oath to not eat. Uraminhu. Indeed, let's take a look, and we have another Mishnah that says the following: Shvuas shtaim shehein arba. There are two kinds of oaths that are really four kinds of oaths. So let's take a look, and we'll see what the punnet box looks like. I think that's what it's called. So you have we're going to have two dimensions: positive and negative, and future and past. So let's take a look. So she'ochel v'shelo ochel, right? I will eat and I won't eat, right? She'achalti v'shelo achalti, and then you have that I did eat and that I didn't eat. So those are the four different categories. And what's the category of what's the first category? The first category is she'ochel, that I will eat. So clearly she'ochel implies an oath of actual eating. So medikamer shelo ochel, right? Given the fact that we say that shelo ochel means that I'm not going to eat, she'achalti v'shelo achalti, and that I ate and that I didn't eat, mikal de she'ochel lecha de'achilna mashma. The she'ochel lecha implies, as the words naturally would be interpreted, that I'm going to eat of yours. So how could you understand our Mishnah of hashvua she'ochel lecha as meaning an oath that I'm not going to eat of yours? So Amar Abaye she'ochel shtei lashonos mashma. Actually, there are two implications of she'ochel. One is that I'm going to eat, but the other is that I'm not going to eat. And how do we get there? How do we get there? How could it possibly mean that I'm not going to eat? Well, if you say there's a classic joke of, how could the word no ever mean anything other than no? And the answer is if I were to say you no, right? So then all of a sudden everybody understands. I don't mean no, right? I mean yes. So the point is how you misarvin bola echel amar achilna. Achilna, right? If I were to pressure you to say, come on, I want you to eat, I want you to eat. V'su shvua she'ochel, and then you make an oath that you're going to eat. De'achilna mashma. That implies that you're going to eat it. But aval amar lo achilna. But if I'm pressuring you to say what? Food. Yeah, I know. Well, let's say what's your favorite kind of food? Chicken. So if I pressure you and I say I want you to eat the chicken, I want you to eat your chicken. So then if you swear that you're going to eat the chicken, it means that you're going to eat the chicken. But what about what's your least favorite food? Pork. You don't like pork. All right. So yeah, it's good that you don't like pork because we shouldn't eat pork. So if I were to tell you, eat the pork, and then Visu Amar Shavua Sha'ochel, and then you make an oath that about eating, what you're really swearing to is that you're not going to eat. Meaning, if I keep telling you, don't eat it, don't eat it, don't eat it. All right, and already, I'm not going to eat it. I'm swearing about the eating that I'm not going to eat it. That's what the person's essentially saying. So of course he's not going to eat it. Delo achil nakamar. So again, that is all implying that he's not going to eat it. Now, the Ran for this discussion, you have to actually turn to Tet Zayin Amabet. And so that's if we take a look at the Tet Zayin Amabet, the second Ran on the top line. So hayu misarvin bo le'echol v'amar achilna v'su amar shvua she'ochel de'achilna mashma. L'fum hayu lishna. According to this language, mashma deki hechi tzarach hochacha lomar d'she'ochel de'lo achilna mashma. That in the case where I'm telling you not to eat, if you then says she'ochel, that implies that you're not going to eat. So hachinami tzarach hochacha d'she'ochel achilna mashma. So that implies. And similarly, that implies that if I say you should eat, then you're going to also eat. So ubereish parak shvuas shtayim basra beokimte d'Abaye. In the similar language in the Gemara in Shvuas, there's a different language for Abaye, Gufei, lo mashma hachi, ela b'distama, right? In our description, we said that the first step was pressuring to eat, that in order for there to be, for the oath of I'm going to eat to mean I will eat, we're talking about a case where there's pressure to eat. But in the case in Shvuas, it doesn't talk about pressure to eat. It just talks about saying I'm going to eat. So if you just say I'm going to eat, so that implies that without any effort to try and encourage the person to eat, an oath of I'm going to eat makes more sense. Is what I'm implying. This is one of those sugyot that has a conflict in it between the two places. And I wrote over there in Masechah Shavuos, Gam came the sugya de hasam adifat, that there it makes more sense. So the point is that what the Ran is saying here is that even though we set up a story about where she'ochel lecha means I'm going to eat, the truth is that we all understand that she'ochel lecha naturally would ordinarily mean that I'm going to eat of yours. Okay, so now we've given answer number one to how in our Mishnah we can say a shavua she'ochel lecha, and that could somehow mean that I'm an oath that I'm not going to eat of yours. So now we're going to offer a different answer. Rav Ashi Amar she'ochel d'shvua, that actually ochel, when you say she'ochel, what actually should change it to she'i ochel kamar. It should be in our Mishnah that I'm not going to eat she'i. She'i ochel means that I'm not going to eat, and so that he effectively changes the language of our Mishnah. Well, im kain pshita, isn't it obvious that she'i ochel is not going to work? Ma'ila memra. What in the world is he possibly saying? So the answer is mahu detema. What would I have thought? Mekam lishnahi. That maybe this was just a messed up speech. The itkil, and he stumbled over the words. So and in fact, if we take a look in the rush is in the side, in the very margin, on the right hand side. If you take a look 6 lines down in the widest of the lines of the rush, at the end of the line, it says Ma'u detema mekem lishnahu. Vahu lo lomar, v'haya lo lomar, she'ochel. That he says to you that he wanted to say she'ochel. And he made a mistake in his language. And he said, I won't eat. And I might have thought that in this situation we will believe him. So Kamash Malan Kaban Dehoti Bisvasav, since came out of his words, out of his mouth, that he's not going to eat. Lo mahaminan. We don't believe him. So v'mai dekamar basar haki, what he says later. So if in fact he says sh'i okel, that I'm not going to, that he makes an oath that he's not going to eat, and then he says later, no, you misunderstood. I meant to say that I am going to eat. It just was my words. Just I stumbled over the words. If he says it later, it doesn't work. He has to effectively correct himself immediately. And so as a result, that's what we're coming to teach us here. So therefore, we now have 2 different answers. So now the Gemara is going to understand. So Abaye lo amar tam ka Rav Ashi. Now Abaye didn't answer Rav Ashi's answer. Rav Ashi was the second of the answers that we changed the language in our Mishnah. And why didn't Abaye say that way? Because our Mishnah doesn't say she'i ochel. So he didn't want to change the language of our Mishnah. But Rav Ashi nade min tam da Abaye, and Rav Ashi changed the approach of Abaye. He didn't want to give Abaye's answer because kasavar shalo ochel nami mashma shtei lashonos. If you're going to say that ochel implies 2 possibilities, well then shalo ochel should also imply 2 possibilities. Hayu misarvanim bo la ochel va'amar lo achilna lo achilna va'amar nami shvua bein she'ochel bein shalo ochel. Hadin achilna mashma de amar the ikala tarutsanami lishna shavua de shalo achel shavua de lo achilna kamar. So the point is that the Gemara explains that in both directions, if the person is being pressured to eat and the guy says I'm not going to eat, and then he makes an oath that he's not going to, whether he swears that he's going to, uses the word she'ochel or he uses the word shelo ochel, the implication is that he's not going to eat. And similarly, and if he's being pressured to eat, so whether he says it positive or negative, it means that he will eat. And then on the other hand, if he's being pressured to not eat, then it doesn't make a difference whether he says shelo ochel or ochel. It means that he's not going to eat. Meaning, the point is if the environment matters for ochel, that she'ochel, then the environment should matter for shelo ochel. And the fact that we don't differ, we don't have the similar statement about, our Mishnah said hashvua she'ochelach. We don't also say hashvua shelo ochelacha. That we don't say it both directions implies that it's only with respect to she'ochelacha that we have this uncertainty. So therefore, that is why Rav Ashi did not want to say like Abaye. So Ella Tana Pascha, right? So rather, the Tana believes that whatever you say, she'ochel dachilna mashma, that when you say she'ochel, that implies that you are going to eat. V'shelo ochel lo ochel mashma, and when you say you're not going to eat, that implies that you're not going to eat. And if we take a look at the Ran on the next page, the Ran tells us the halacha here, and so if we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up from the narrow line, from the bottom of the narrow lines, And what does he say? The Inyan halacha kvar kasafti beperak shvuah shtayim basra, that in that parak in Masechah Shavuos, the Ran writes shal Rambam zal pasaka Abaye. The Rambam holds like Abaye that context matters. The Kesugya, the Hasam, and like the Sugya over there, v'harakti sham b'tamo shel davar, and I explained over there his reasoning, and b'siyat d'shmaya, with God's help. Aval haRamban, the Ramban pasuk k'Rav Ashi. The Ramban concludes like Rav Ashi. D'la'olam she'ochel de'achilna mashma. That when you say she'ochel, that implies you are going to eat, and v'shelo ochel shelo ochel mashma. And that when you say you're not going to eat, it's you're not going to eat. And so in fact, what we see is we've got a machlokus between the Rambam and the Ramban. Now, how do we actually paskin? So it's interesting. In the Shulchan Aruch, it says that the Shulchan Aruch first brings the Ramban's approach, namely that what you say is all that matters, irrespective of the context. And it even notes that even maybe if the person is pushing you in one direction, whatever your oath comes out of your mouth, that's what's implied. We're not going to take any direction from what people are trying to push you to do. And so as a result, but then the Shulchan Aruch cites the Rambam's perspective as a yesh mi she'omer, that there is somebody who says, which seems to suggest that the Shulchan Aruch prefers the first approach, because a yesh mi she'omer after a stam seems, at least in my mind, I think, but I'm not 100% sure, seems that we would paskin like the first approach, which is the general one. But the bottom line is that if you don't get yourself into this situation, because it's very confusing if you make an oath especially based on context, where you mean one thing, but your words come out differently. All right. So yes, very irresponsible. So back to the Mishnah.
One thing that I was thinking of, by the time of the Gemara, widely as a first language, but they don't talk about the possibility here about having erred because you don't understand these really subtle differences. And I certainly don't understand Hebrew well enough to know these little subtle differences.
So I would say that it's an interesting question. My read of this is that this is meant to be in the language that you're understanding. And that when it comes to English, we do also have subtle differences. Mm-hmm. And so it's assuming that you're understanding those subtle differences. If you don't understand the subtle differences, then you shouldn't be using that language to make an oath. Right. I don't know, again, it leads to problems if you don't understand the language that you're using if you were to make an oath. That it certainly highlights that particular point.
Thanks.
Okay, so now our next Mishnah is going to contrast Nedarim and Shvuos. Again, Nedarim are about the object, Shvuos are about my action. Okay, so let's take a look. So Zechomer b'Shvuos shebenedarim mi b'nedarim. This is the way that Shvuos are more strict than Nedarim. Now, what is that referencing? So Rashi, or the Mefarish here, helps us out on the bottom line. Hada amran Shvuos shelo ochel to be Shvuos aser u'b'nedarim mutter. Right, when it said Shvuos shelo ochel, but when you say Konam shelo ochel, when you say, right, so when it comes to shavua that I will not eat, that's a valid shavua. But if you say korban that I will not eat, it's not a valid neder. So we're going to see that in the Gemara, that that this is the Gemara's initial understanding, that it's not a valid neder at all. Okay, so that's point number one. But on the other hand, and there are also stringencies associated with making a neder that are applied that don't apply to a shvua. So ketzad amar konam sukkah shani osa. If I say that the sukkah that I've made is going to be something that I'm not going to benefit from, it's going to be treated like a korban. Or if I say lulav sha'ani notel, or konam that that's going to be treated like a korban, the lulav that I take, or the tefillin sha'ani maniach, or the tefillin that I put on. In all of those cases, I'm prohibiting the object. So as a result, b'nedarim asur, when it comes to a neder, it's going to cause a prohibition. The shvuos mutar, but when it comes to a shvua, it's going to be permitted. She'ein nishban labor ala mitzvos, because you're not allowed to make an oath about yourself that you are not going to fulfill a mitzvah, that you're going to violate a mitzvah. So now the Gemara is going to ask about the first of our two rules. So let's take a look and see what it says. Chomer miklal denederhu. If you're saying that it's more strict, the implication is that it still has some effect. But what are we talking about? Vaha mutter katani. But when it came to korban that I will not eat of yours, we said that that was actually totally permitted. It's as if you hadn't said anything. So it's not a neder at all. It's not less strict. It's nothing. So, and the Ran helps us understand, right? Miklal nederhu, the mikatani de shvua chamura mi neder. If you look at the Gemara line, first of the medium wide lines in the Ran. So when you say that it implies that it's a neder, because we say that the shvua is more stringent from a neder, mashma de neder nami ika isura. It implies that there is something prohibited in connection with that neder. But ela de lo chamer kishvua, it's just not as strong as and strict as a shvua, but it implies that there is some shvua to it. But baha mutter katani, ditzanan lo ochel lecha mutter, that if you say a shvua korban lo ochel lecha, I'm not. It's as if you didn't do anything. Again, the reason is because the korban lo ochel lecha is a language of making something like a korban. And what are we making like a korban when I say korban lo ochel lecha? I'm making like a korban not eating of yours. So that implies that I can still eat of yours. So it's nothing. It's not a valid oath at all. And if it's not a valid oath at all, how could that be a quote unquote leniency? Or how could the Nedarim be a stringency? It's not, it's like comparing apples and oranges. So aseifa de'idach bava buktani. No, your hava meaning that we've learned in the Mishnah based on the Mefarish is not the right comparison. What's the comparison? It's about the end of the discussion. It's about the other part of it, where we say shvua she'eni yashen, she'eni medaber, she'eni mahalech aser. That in those situations, when I make an oath of I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to speak, I'm not going to walk. So in all those cases, it's totally prohibited. It's prohibited biblically. And it's in that regard that it's stricter than with Nedarim. Because what did we say when, according to Ravina's explanation of the other Mishnah, according to Ravina's explanation of the other Mishnah, if I were to say korban, what was the language? This is on 15b. So that if we say, if we were to say, where is it? Hold on, let me find it. It was the language that we had earlier. If we say konam sha'ani yashen, right? That it's like a korban that I sleep, or korban sha'ani medaber, or korban sha'ani mahalek. In all of those cases, what did we say? We said that the person is over lo yachel. And Ravina explained, this is on Yudal and Mabet, and Ravina explained that these are all considered only rabbinic nedarim. And so even though it's not biblical, the rabbi still said that you couldn't do it. And so as a result, that's the reason. Now, the Ran asks on this an interesting question. If we're saying, right, in our situation, what have we done? Why did we ask this question? We asked this question because we said that you can't say that something is more strict if in one case it's totally permitted and in the other case it's prohibited. But when it comes to making a shvua about an oath, which was the second case of our Mishnah, and we said that when you make a shvua about a shvua about a mitzvah, if you make a shvua about a mitzvah, it's nothing. But if you make a neder about a mitzvah, it can take effect. don't we have the same question? We have again a case of mutter and a case of usser. That's not a stringency. So the Ran explains that actually it is a stringency, because if you were to make a shvua that you're going to violate a mitzvah, then even though the shvua does not take effect, and as a result you are still obligated to do the mitzvah, you have made a shvua shav. You've made a invalid oath, and you are punished for that. And so as a result, because you're punished for that, that there is some effect there is some negative aspect to your having made the oath. And so as a result, we can say that making a neder is more strict than that, because there is some negative ramifications for your having said that. So, okay, so that is the first point of the Mishnah in connection with what the stringency is associated with a neder, with a shvua greater than a neder. So now the Gemara is going to ask the question: how do we know that chomer b'nedarim shvuas? So what's the stringency of nedarim with respect to shvuas? We said that the neder can apply even to a mitzvah. So the Gemara asks, how do we know? So Rav Kahana Masni Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. So Rav Kahana taught it in the name of Rav Gidol, in the name of Rav. The Rav Tavyume Masni Amar Rav Gidol Amar Shmuel. And Rav Tavyume said, Rav Gidol said it in the name of Shmuel. But in either way, the question was asked, Minayin she'ein nishba'in la'avor al hamitzvos. How do I know that you can't make an oath to violate a mitzvah? Talmud Lomar lo yachel dvaro. The pasuk says, right? The full pasuk is ish ki dor neder laHashem o hishavash shvuah le'asor isar al nafsho lo yachel dvaro. He shouldn't desecrate his word, meaning that your word is your bond. If you say something, you should do it. So, but what's the implication? Dvaro la yachel. He's not allowed to desecrate his word, meaning that his intention he can't violate. Aval mechel hu l'chevtzei shemayim. For his own word, he's not going to desecrate it, but in order to protect the will of Hashem, he should desecrate it. And so as a result, that teaches that when it comes to a shvua, you will desecrate. Well, ma'ishna neder. 1 second. That same pasuk refers to, as I read it, it's ki dor neder laHashem o yishavash shvuah le'asor isar al nafsho. Both of them are referred to in that pasuk. So why, diksiv ish ki yidor neder laHashem lo yachel dvaro. The same pasuk that says lo yachel dvaro also refers to nedarim. So shvua nami haksiv o hishavash shvuah laHashem lo yachel dvaro. So same situation. Why should we make any kind of differentiation between a shvua and a neder? So Abaye is going to offer the first explanation, then Rav is going to challenge it, and Rava will offer his explanation. So Amar Abaye, Hada Amar Hanas Sukkah Alai. Now, the issue is that the person is saying that I'm not going to benefit from the sukkah. So Hada Amar Shvua Shalo Ana Mina Sukkah. And the oath is that I'm not going to, again, is this benefit of the sukkah I'm not going to take, meaning it's the sukkah that becomes prohibited. And so that's why it works with a neder. It's on the object. But when it comes to a shvua, then it's on me. And so that's why a shvua will not work. So a neder will work because it's on the sukkah, and it doesn't prevent me from doing any sukkah. It's just this sukkah. But when it comes to a vow is on me, and it's not on the object. So Amarava mitzvos lihanos nitnu. Well, 1 second, that kind of language won't work, because mitzvos, we have a general principle that mitzvos were not given for our benefit. They were given, for us to perform God's will. There's not a benefit that's associated. And we talked about this yesterday in connection with the mikvah situation, that if you go into the mikvah on a cold winter day, that's not going to be considered a benefit. So Amarava. So as a result, if you go into the sukkah on a cold fall day, that should not be anything that should prohibit you from going into the sukkah. So El Amarava, Hada Amar Yeshiva Sukkah Alai. So the point is the neder is not about the benefit, it's about saying that sitting in the sukkah sitting in this sukkah is going to be prohibited to me. So if the person says that, so it's about the object. But when you talk about yourself, I'm not going to sit in the sukkah. That's about my own action. And so that's the distinction that we make. I know, but if the question is can you make an oath that says you're not going to sit in the sukkah? And the answer is you can't make an oath that you're not going to sit in the sukkah, but you can make a neder that says that the sukkah's benefit, that sukkah's sitting in, I'm not going to enjoy. Okay? The she'ein nishbat. What?
8 times a year.
I know, okay, 8 days a year, absolutely. The she'ein nishban labor ala mitzvos mehacha nakale. So how do I know that now in fact, is it really from the words dvaro lo yachel that we learn this concept? Because we have another place where we suggest another source for this concept. Mihasam nafka, the time mihasam nafkale. We learned it from something else. The Tanya, because we have a brisa. Yachol nishba levatel es mitzvah below bitel yachol yehei chayev. I might have thought that if I make an oath that I'm not going to fulfill that I'm going to violate a mitzvah, and then I don't violate the mitzvah, that I'm liable for having violated my word. I might think that would be a problem with, and I will have sinned against violating the law that I can't violate a shvuah. Talmud lahara oletev. In the pasuk in Vayikra, it says, "O nefesh kisi shava levatei b'svasayim lahara oletev l'chol asher yivatei adam b'shvuah ne'elam mimenu v'hu yadav Hashem lachas me'ela." That when it comes to somebody who makes an oath about something good or bad, that in fact, if they violate the oath, then they're going to have to offer a particular korban. Is the context. So mahatavas rishus. Just as when it refers to doing good, it refers to it something that's discretionary, meaning something that you can do or you don't have to do. Afhara l'rishus. So too, when it comes to doing something discretionary, it's got to be something that you can do or you can't do. Yatsa nishba levatel mitzvah below bitel. So this comes to exclude somebody who swears that they're going to violate a mitzvah and then doesn't violate it. She'ein harishus biyado. He doesn't have the permission to do that. He doesn't have the ability to do that, and so as a result, that is not going to be a valid oath. So what's the question? We have two different sources. We have the source of dvaro lo yachel, and we have the source of lahara o lahetev. So chad kra lemiftara b'karban shvua, v'chad lemiftara min lav shvua. So the answer is that we have two different concepts. There's the concept of whether or not you're going to have to offer a sacrifice for having violated if you did it accidentally, and there's a second concept of whether or not you would get punished by lashes. So when it comes to the pasuk in Vayikra, which is talking about karbanos, so then as a result, that pasuk is telling us that you're not going to be chayav a karban even if you did it unintentionally. And the second is if you did it intentionally, you're not going to be obligated to get lashes because again, you will not have violated that. So the bottom line is that although you'll have violated shvuah shav, you'll have made an improper vow. But the point is that the violation of the vow itself is not going to trigger lashes, and the violation of the vow unintentionally will not trigger a sacrifice. And so we'll pick up from this Mishnah tomorrow. And so the next Mishnah is going to deal with another area in which Nedarim are subject to a greater stringency than Shvuot. But for that, you're going to need to tune in tomorrow. Now, in that regard, I want to note that tomorrow will be Zoom only, because I'm going to be away for the weekend. I'm going to Silver Spring, Maryland. So I hope that because I'm
next week for the bar mitzvah.
no, the bar mitzvah is this Shabbos, and I'm not going to be able to be here. I'm going to be out of town. This weekend. So God willing, we'll see. So hopefully, I look forward to seeing everybody. So so I'm not coming tomorrow morning also. The reason that I'm not coming is the same reason that you're not coming. I'm going a day early because of the storm. So God willing, everybody should stay safe in the storm, stay dry in the storm. And I will see.
And tomorrow's a holiday.
Tomorrow is a holiday. Tomorrow's Veterans Day, exactly. So we should celebrate our veterans, and I wish everybody a wonderful day. What time will the door will be open tomorrow evening?
Yeah.
So just maybe go down to the office after this and you can check with them. All right. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you all on Zoom, God willing, tomorrow.
What day, Monday?